Hello, folks. This is another PyMCon event, and this is actually the last one of the Series 1 round that we have. So really excited to have Yosef here. I'm going to go through, Yosef, how about you give an introduction about yourself? I'll give a brief overview of your package for folks that didn't get a chance to watch the video, and then we can just jump right into the Q&A. Sound good?
Sure. You want me to introduce myself first?
Yeah.
Yeah, so hello, everyone. I can't see you, but I know you're out there. My name's Yosef Kim. I'm an assistant professor currently at the University of Delaware. I direct the Sensory Motor Learning Lab. And so research in our lab focuses on humans acquire, adapt, and refine motor skills. And so I'm really interested in computational modeling, designing behavioral experiments, and more recently, really thinking hard and deeply about statistical inference, because that really underlies a lot of what we do. And so I should mention that I'm going to be moving to beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia, and starting a similar position at the University of British Columbia. So if you like what you hear and you're a graduate student or thinking about going to grad school, definitely get in touch.
Awesome. Yes, congrats indeed. It's Yosef put this whole talk together while he had a lot of other things going on in his life. So it's actually super appreciated that he was quite flexible with his timing. So this is this PyMCon web series, this event in particular, is as a Q&A. So Yosef has already given a talk and it is on the Discourse. What I'll do is I'll do a quick overview showing you the async stuff. And then while I'm doing that, feel free to ask any questions. We're here to have a conversation, here for Yosef to answer your questions and get you acquainted with both himself, how he uses the library, and more about Bayesian statistics in general. That's the whole point of the web series. So I'm going to pull up my second screen. So hopefully folks can see it. Yep, sharing. So on here is the Discourse thread. Ideally, we'll be answering questions that are posted here. So go ahead and start throwing in your questions on the Discourse thread if you have any. We'll also be taking questions from the Zoom chat, but the Discord chat, the Discourse is nice because then anyone in the future can see it. Yosef's talk is here. Hopefully you folks got a chance to watch it. He went through the entire library in his collab, but if you haven't seen it, let me go through the library first. The library here is on GitHub, and you can download and use it. I went through and tried a couple examples myself. It's quite nice. Has a lot of the common statistical tests already implemented, such as two-way mix and ANOVA and whatnot. An easy API like you get from Minitab or other types of softwares that are similar. But the nice part under the hood, it uses Bayesian statistics. And so with that, I guess, Yosef, I wanted to kick it off and first ask you, when you were putting together this library, how did you decide which tests you were going to add and which ones you were going to leave out?
Yeah, so as far as which tests I was going to include, I think there were two main factors. One was a lot of this library is based on John Krushke's textbook, doing Bayesian data analysis. So part of what I did was a function of what was in the book and the order in which the tests were presented. The second main factor was I was thinking about what tests are most commonly used in both behavioral and neurosciences. Because I should say, like when I was working on this library, the primary motivation at first was this was going to be a learning tool for myself. And then it was also going to be a library that my current lab members and future lab members could use for their own projects, because I find that, you know, there's just a startup cost to doing Bayesian modeling. And so I thought this would provide a nice framework for people to expand on. And so I think what you'll find in BST is the sorts of statistical models that probably cover, I would say conservatively 90% of the tests that I'm running for my own projects. And so the other thing I want to say is that this is also an evolving project. So you've contributed, Robin, I hope other people will contribute in the future, and I'm continuously adding new models and new tests. So for instance, I just added a model that's analogous to a frequentist repeated measures one-way ANOVA. And then over the weekend, I was working on a meta-analysis. So that should be added hopefully by the end of this week to the library as well. So this is definitely, a good start, but there's going to be more to come soon.
That's awesome. And so as you were a PhD student, if I recall from your talk correctly, and from your field, most people end up using frequentist style tests. As you switched over to these Bayesian style tests, how have folks received that? And has it been a challenge in your lab to get folks to use this library and use sort of the Bayesian idea of thinking, or are folks, is there still a debate going on?
Yeah, so I think I can answer that question at a few different levels. So within my lab and the students that I work with, I've been thinking about Bayesian statistics and teaching myself Bayesian statistics and trying to learn what I can for, I would say, several years now. And so during that time, I was kind of talking about the advantages and reading papers with lab members. And so there wasn't hardly any resistance. In fact, I think the students that I work with were just as excited about implementing Bayesian statistics in their work as I was. I would say, like, as far as my field, which I would consider, the study of human motor control and motor learning, I would say, like, within that small niche, I don't see a lot of papers with Bayesian statistics in them. And to be honest, the papers that I'm on, we're just starting to publish now using some of these methods. So my hope is that, as I publish more work and as similar-minded colleagues publish work using Bayesian stats, it will become more commonplace. I definitely don't think there's a resistance to it. I think there's just inertia. I think if you talk to someone who's mathematically minded or, has a quantitative mindset, and you explain to them the relative advantages of Bayesian inference over frequentist tests, I think most people, would not have too many arguments against the logic of Bayesian inference. I think what prevents people is that, again, there's just a high startup cost to doing it, to switching the way you do statistics. And so again, like, even though this library was initially for me and my lab, I realized that, hopefully this will be useful to other people as well. And if it lowers the bar for entry into using Bayesian stats even a little bit, then, then I'm very pleased with that result.
So when in your experience, and there's a good argument to be made that if, frequentist statistics work and they provide a perspective on probability, what was it about Bayesian statistics that inspired you or was useful enough for you to spend a lot of your time building this new library to make it easy for folks?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think very concretely, like, the initial motivation was during my postdoc because, I had quote unquote null results. And so under the frequentist framework, there's not a really good way to provide evidence for a null result. And so my postdoc advisor told me about Bayes factors. And so I started looking into Bayes factors. And then I ran into papers from people like John Krushke and Richard McElreath talking about the rationale for Bayesian statistics. And so that really was the start of it all. And I think for me, the appeal is that, you can, in frequentist statistics, what are you doing? You're providing, at the end of the day, you're coming up with a p-value, the probability of the data, given a very specific hypothesis, the null hypothesis typically. But in science, what are you trying to do? You're trying to provide evidence for your specific hypotheses regarding a phenomenon of interest. And so being able to do that inverse probability is only possible with Bayesian approaches. And so philosophically, to me, that made a lot of sense and was very appealing. And then the other factor was that for me, it just seems like Bayesian statistics is a much more unified way of thinking about probability. I think maybe a lot of people in the audience, and maybe even you, Robin, as well, like when you learn frequentist stats, it kind of feels like you're learning a bunch of recipes for like different tests for different situations, and it's not always clear exactly like what the underlying theory is. And so you're just kind of memorizing these very specific algorithms, and usually you forget them. You just know that, oh, if I have two independent groups, I want to do a t-test, and if I have multiple groups, maybe I want to do an ANOVA, whatever. And I don't mean to like talk poorly about frequentist statistics or anything. That's not the point, but it just made a lot more sense. The Bayesian approach made a lot more sense for me in terms of what is the goal of the study and your inference at the end of the day. You want probability statements about your hypotheses, not about the data given a very specific hypothesis.
Yeah, I agree with, actually, you made 3 points in a row there between the benefits that you saw in your work with the null hypothesis, which is something that I have faced frequently in my work, the challenge of learning it, and which then led to the motivation to build this package if I go backwards in order. So now I'm going to ask you questions along a particular set of tracks. And for the folks who've just joined, I want to point out again, this particular conversation is a Q&A. Yosef has provided his full talk already recorded. So if you have any questions, either post them in the Zoom chat or post them on the Discourse thread, and we'll be happy to answer them as part of this informal sort of fireside chat. But the next series of questions I have for you, Yosef, is how you managed to learn actually two things, and I'll ask the questions separately, but I'll tell you about the questions at the same time. The first one was Bayesian statistics, because you learned it yourself from your postdoc up until the point, at the minimum, the point where you could implement the library. And that involved the philosophy of it, the code, PyMC. And then later on, I want to ask you about your experience developing an open source library on top of PyMC. But let's first start with your learning journey. A lot of folks in the web series, whether they're going to join your lab as a postdoc or they're just professionals that are out there, they're on their own learning journey. You mentioned a couple of textbooks that you use, like Krushke's book and I think Richard McElvith's book, but what was your learning path? And there was also some point where you learned PyMC in there as well. So how did you go from somebody who'd just been suggested to look into Bayes factors and you saw a couple papers to being someone that's proficient enough to now develop a bespoke library for Bayesian stats?
Yeah. So, first of all, I don't consider myself an expert on Bayesian statistics. Like I'm on the path to learning myself, and BST is part of that. But as far as learning Bayesian statistics enough so that I could put something like this together and start using it in my own work, yeah, those two textbooks from John Krushke and Richard McElreath. McElreath's textbook is called Statistical Rethinking. I think they're written so well, and I tend to enjoy textbooks, like if I need to learn a subject. So just a lot of hours were spent, with the textbooks, going through the problem sets, actually landing on a lot of great PyMC resources. There are reports of both the Krushke as well as the McElreath textbook. And so in large part, a lot of what BST is adapting someone else's port of the Krushke textbook into PyMC and just updating it and, converting them into functions and whatnot. At the same time, because I had like very concrete questions that I wanted to try and answer, every little bit that I learned, I could figure out a way to try and apply it to something that was really meaningful for me. So I think using a textbook is great, using it as a resource, finding online resources as well that are helpful. But I think to really solidify your learning, you have to apply it to something that is personally meaningful. And so because I'm a researcher, I had lots of questions. And so that all came together. And then at the same time, I mentioned that a lot of my work involves computational modeling. And in neuroscience, people talk about the Bayesian brain. So at the same time that I was learning about Bayesian statistical inference, creating statistical models for data analysis, I was also learning about designing, building Bayesian models of human cognition. And so a lot of these threads, have been coming together for a while. And I should say, like, this process has taken place over a number of years. Like, I joke that I've taught myself Bayesian statistics like probably 3 or 4 different times, at this point. As an assistant professor, you have a lot of responsibility. So you pick something up and then you have to put it down for a while and then you have to relearn it. So again, just I think consistency, having a meaningful project, and then having the resources, all of that kind of work together for me to be able to put this out there.
Got it. So then my next questions is if we look through your commit tree, it was, like you said, it wasn't just a one-day process for you to learn Bayesian statistics and build this library. You've been, for folks you can see, because GitHub is all public, you've been working on this for quite a while. So at least in minimum since October of last year. It's one thing to learn statistics, like you mentioned, and the philosophy and be able to use PPLs, but you've done something which I think is really cool, is gone out and you've made your own open source project. So can you talk me through, you talked through the motivation already about why you did it, but can you talk me through more like granular, like how did you do it? Did you just wake up one day and you were like, I'm going to start this library, and you started from scratch? Did you take a collection of scripts and then start with that to make your initial commit? And then what was your open source development sort of progression after that?
Yeah, so I'm not a software developer really. I'm a researcher who knows how to code to get certain things done. And I had some familiarity with Git and GitHub. A lot of my projects, I've shared the data and code through GitHub. And so, I had some latent skills there. And then as I was, on my 3rd or 4th time learning Bayesian statistics, I landed on Jordi Warmanhoven's, his repo, where he ported all of the models from doing Bayesian data analysis. And so as I was going through the text, looking at the Python code, I was adapting it. And then again, this motivation to have a useful tool for myself in the lab came together. And so I don't think I woke up one morning and decided like, this is going to be a library that I share with everyone. I think I woke up one day and realized that I wanted to have a written record of what I was doing. And I also wanted this written record to be reusable. And so maybe back in October, I had the idea, okay, let's make this a repo, but it's a repo for me and whoever's in my lab. That was the initial thought. And then by the time I had, 10 tests together, 10 models together, I was thinking, oh, wow, maybe this will actually be useful for other people. And so then I just kind of put it out there. I think it was at the end of 2022, last year. But this is my first experience putting together a package like this and sharing it. Previously in the past, all I've done is shared the analysis code or the raw data from my specific research projects. This is the first time I tried to put something together that would be of general usefulness for people. So that there was a learning curve involved with that too. Like I said, I knew a bit about Git and GitHub, but I actually had to learn quite a bit more in order to just do this. And then, what else was really helpful? At this time, I was looking a lot at the PyMC resources, and then also looking into how to contribute. So I think just by trying to contribute to other open source projects, that kind of got me in the mindset of, it made me more familiar with the workflow of creating an open library. And so I think all of this kind of came together towards the very end of last year, so that it just made sense to try and share this and to see, whether or not it would be useful for other people as well.
Got it. I mean, I was really excited to see this because I was talking to Kevin Murphy independently of this, and he was mentioning how if there was a library that made common statistical tests easy, that would help probably a large audience, right?
Yeah.
Not everybody's trying to build a bespoke Bayesian model from scratch all the time. And so when I saw your PyMCon submission, I was like, oh my God, this is perfect. Coincidentally enough, Kevin is a I don't know, a professor emeritus, or he was teaching at Vancouver at one point. So
Yeah, I saw that. I heard his interview on what is it called? Learning Bayesian statistics.
yes.
Yeah.
Alex and Dora.
Yeah, I don't think he's at UBC anymore.
Okay, he's definitely in Google because I know I work with him there. But
Okay.
it's just interesting to see how these things that seem coincidental come together.
Yeah, and like for people in the audience who maybe don't have experience with publishing libraries or whatnot, I feel like there's just a lot of value in just trying it out and putting your work out there. Because what I tweeted an announcement about this, and I was expecting like, a few people in my niche field to be attracted to it, but in reality, it was like you and the PyMC developers and the PyMC community, and mostly people in industry who are excited about it, which I wasn't anticipating. And so that, and then I was encouraged by some of the PyMCon organizers to submit an abstract, and I was like, wow, yeah, that sounds really cool. So you just never know, once you put your stuff out there, you never know how it's all going to come together. And usually, like, you find out that there are more people interested in it than you initially thought.
Yeah, I have to say I really enjoy that part of open source, is the community feel of it without any sort of strings attached. You're really just putting ideas out there and people get excited about them. And in this case, I'm really excited that you put this out there. And I'm glad you did, rather than keep it as a set of scripts internally. Now, I want to ask you another question, but I'm gonna do a lead in with the folks that are on the call. So
Sure.
for the folks that are here, first off, as you heard, I highly encourage you to contribute to open source, whether it be Bayesian open source, frequentist open source, or data processing or whatever. Open source in my life has been quite transformational and helpful. And as you can even see from Yosef's answer, getting into open source can have knock-on benefits that you're not anticipating. A common question I get, though, since I've been doing open source for a number of years, is where to start. And I think most people, they want to start, especially if you're at PyMCon. I assume I have a strong prior that you'd think, oh, I want to contribute to PyMC. And I want to point out, totally welcome to contribute to PyMC. Anybody can contribute to PyMC. But there's two things I'll tell you about PyMC before we use Yosef's library as a contrast. One is that PyMC now is a larger library, and it's got a lot of stuff going on, and it's got all these code modules all over the place, and they call each other. And if you're a first-time contributor and you're not used to working on a larger Python package, it can be confusing to figure out how all this stuff fits together in the tests and everything like that. Another thing is that PyMC doesn't solve any particular problem, right? PyMC is a probabilistic programming language. So when you work on PyMC, you don't really build anything, let's say, concrete as an end product. You largely build a function that makes implements a new distribution or fix some sampling function or do some usually small part as a first contribution to a relatively abstract piece of code. Now, I want to contrast this with Yosef's library, because Yosef's library is in a very different state, which presents a lot of opportunities. One is, and this is actually a good thing, is that it's a relatively few amount of modules, and it's really easy to read. You can go through and you can see how different tests are written. This is actually really cool, even if you're a PyMC power user, because, for instance, I don't know how to do robust linear regression, for instance, and I can just go read the model right here. It's just implemented. So the single module approach he has right now makes it super easy to read in, understand the context of the code, and extend the library. The other part is that, as you can see from the docs, as soon as you contribute something, let's go to examples. As soon as you contribute something, you immediately can make an example out of it. So it's a very short path from your contribution to having a new model that you can show off. So if you're looking to start contributing to open source, I would frankly recommend working on Yosef's library rather than jumping into PyMC specifically. But with that lead up, I wanted to ask you, Yosef, since you're the library maintainer, it's not me in this case. What kind of contributions would be useful for you for people to help out with? Like, where do you see this package going? How can you see people helping out? Where would you want folks to start diving in as contributors?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do want to step back and say one thing about contributing to PyMC. So even though PyMC is this huge library, what you all have done that's so great is on the PyMC webpage, there's very specific instructions on how to contribute. And so that's how I was able to get started there. But with reference to BST, I'm looking for contributions ranging from, you also are working through the Krushky text and you notice that this model is not actually in BST yet, and you have an implementation that follows a similar format as what I'm doing, and you want to add that. That's wonderful. Other contributions, like I said, I'm a researcher who codes. I'm not, a full-time software developer. So if you see ways to make the code more efficient, cleaner, standardized and whatnot, especially with things like unit tests and just improving the overall workflow. If that's your contribution, great, And if you are someone who's been using BST or learning Bayesian statistics using BST, and you notice in the examples, if you notice mistakes in the example notebooks, for instance, whether they're typos or something's out of order or anything really, you can contribute that way. So I think everything from very minute details to like the overall I guess number of options as far as what BST can do in terms of the different models, all of those are welcome contributions.
Got it. The reason
I should say too, like in the webpage for BST, on that GitHub pages site, if you look at documentation, yeah. So like if you look at future plans,
oops, right here.
Yeah, so any of those would be a great place to start, Like for instance, I don't include any prior predictive checks except for one of the models. And I know that that is an important part of the workflow. So, adding something like that would be awesome. Like I mentioned, I'm adding a Bayesian meta-analysis, but I'm only adding one type of meta-analysis. There are many different types of meta-analyses, and the one that I'm going to add soon is a meta-analysis of looking at two proportions. So like if you have a control and treatment group and seeing how many incidences you see of some event. But that can go any number of directions. Model selection, I was thinking of hypothesis testing, also incorporating maximum entropy prior. So that's something that Richard McElreath really, he really advocates for. And, the priors that I'm using right now in the models are the priors that John Krushky used in his textbook. They're generally skeptical, uninformative priors, but, there are ways to implement a more, let's say, principled approach to using priors. And so if someone wants to help out with that, basically what I'm saying is I'm open to all different types of contributions.
So this is something that we haven't formally announced yet. We still have to figure out, but I want to see from folks here, who would anybody be interested in a sprint on the Bayesian statistics toolbox, where we focus on that library and you folks get a chance to contribute in a manner where Yosef or I are here to help you out. If so, let us know again, either in the Discourse chat or the thread. It was going to be a sort of add-on event that we were going to think about doing after Yosef gets settled in Vancouver in a couple of months. But if folks in the community want to do that, well, we can organize a more formal sprint. So do let us know. Let me check again if there are any other questions. Okay. Seeing none on the Discourse or in the chat, I don't have any other questions, Yosef. Is there anything else you want to leave the community with?
I just want to say, thank you for inviting me, and also thanks to the PyMC developers for developing such a great library, great tool. Yeah, and I hope BST is useful for this audience and for future audience members. And yeah, I think doing a sprint sounds great. I think maybe at the sprint we can. My thought was focusing maybe more on kind of the code itself as opposed to additional models at that point. Maybe we can, you and I can talk, Robin, and send out an announcement about that later.
Yeah, of course. I think the beauty of open source is once it's out there, these things tend to gain momentum. If you talk to Chris Fonsbeck, he talks about how for him, PyMC was his graduate student project, right? He needed Bayesian statistics back in the mid 2000s when he was studying, I think it was ecology or something related to biology, epidemiology, because he's an epidemiologist.
Right.
He needed a library, and so he started PyMC version 1, and he also says the same thing. He had no idea that anybody else would like it, that it could be useful, but in the span of not too long, there's been 4 major versions of PyMC. There's a big core team. It's been used by thousands of people. So quite amazing how these ideas and libraries tend to flourish and grow. And I'm really excited. I'm excited to work on PyMC because it's a big major project, but I'm also excited for the possibilities of your library as well, because it does solve a problem. I wish I had this library when I first started learning statistics. So
thanks. Yeah, thank you. I hope it solves problems for other people, because I think, even in the short time that my lab has been using it, we find that it's just so convenient to have the scaffolding for developing these models, so that you can use it right away within your research. So I hope other people find it useful that way too.
Cool. All right, with that, I will end now the final event of Series 1. For the final pitch, guys, people enjoyed Series 1 so much that we're going to be doing another PyMCon web series. So pay attention to the website. We'll send out some announcements, and we'll be back at it with PyMCon events. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.